This is the EWN Podcast Network.
Welcome to Late Boomers, our podcast guide to creating your third act with style, power, and impact. Hi, I'm Cathy Worthington.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Join us as we bring you conversations with successful entrepreneurs, entertainers, and people with vision who are making a difference in the world.
Everyone has a story, and we'll take you along for the ride on each interview, recounting the journey our guests have taken to get where they are, inspiring you to create your own path to success. Let's get started. Hello, I'm Cathy Worthington, welcoming you to our Late Boomers podcast. Today, our special guest is Pamela M. Covington, speaker, anti-poverty advocate, women's transition coach, author of A Day at the Fair, One Woman's Welfare Passage, and education proponent. Pamela is zealous about encouraging others to move beyond their challenges in order to live happier and more fulfilling lives. As a women's transition coach, she helps women build up the resilience needed to overcome adversity, which is often resulting from unplanned and unpleasant major life changes.
And I'm Mary Elkins. As an advocate, Pamela supports anti-poverty programs by meeting with congressional members and staff, writing letters to the editor and opinion editorials, and sharing stories about her lived experiences. Her goal is to help ensure the same programs remain in place that many years ago enabled her to meet her basic necessities. Welcome, Pamela, to our podcast.
Thank you, Mary and Cathy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, Pamela, tell us your backstory and some of the things that led you to where you are today.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, many years ago, I lived a very comfortable middle-class lifestyle and found myself, through no fault of my own, living in deep poverty being half of the government definition of income for poverty. And in that process, I left because my partner, who had served in Vietnam, suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. And he was wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
On his good days, he was everything to me and the boys. But on his bad ones, he was scary. So at some point, I had to make a really tough decision. I loved him dearly, never replaced anybody. Nobody ever filled his shoes since.
Mm-hmm.
And had to leave that situation for the sake of my and my children's safety. And when I did so, because we were fleeing at a moment's notice, I didn't make any plans for housing. My goal at that time was simply to put some distance between us so that my children and I could feel safe. And lo and behold, I was shocked. It was an economic shock, a culture shock, that I had gone from living in a very desirable downtown Savannah neighborhood in a refurbished Victorian home into a dilapidated cement tenement with no air conditioning, no heat, no stove, no refrigerator. And me and my boys, who were then 9 years old and 1.5. And boy, what a stark reality. Now, mind you, I always like to make this confession up front, that when I was living comfortable, I subscribed to all the same negative stereotypes about people on public assistance. What nerve I had. I didn't even know anyone on welfare. But what I had known was what I saw in the media, which was on TV, some guy waving his hands around and saying, oh, they're freeloaders, they're lazy, they're this or that, they're sitting around getting a big fat check. And I bought into all of that. Ladies, when I ended up giving in and applying for public assistance, I couldn't believe that I was going to have to exist off of $152 a month for myself and my boys. Now, granted, we're talking in the 80s, but on the scale of living, I doubt very much, as I've seen not much else has changed about the welfare system, that anyone can make it off of that. Why the cement box of roaches we were living in was $170 a month. So I'm at a deficit the first of the month automatically. And then I had growing boys. And if you've raised children, you know that when they're growing up, the pot of food is never big enough. So we
Mhm.
struggled. I did not have a stove for 8 months. I cooked on a good day, mind you. I cooked Vienna sausages and grits on a kerosene heater that I borrowed from someone that I eventually came to resent because it too became yet another mouth to feed. Every day I'm walking to the confectionery store with an empty gallon milk jug to spend some of my presage coinage on kerosene for that little monster. And I
Mhm.
had a refrigerator after 3 months of living without one. So I wasn't
Mm.
going to stay there. I made up my mind from day one that there was no way, and you know what, that was going to become my two boys' definition of normal. So even though I
Yeah.
didn't know how I would pull us out of it, I was just determined every day when I wasn't struggling to meet basic necessities like soap and diapers or sanitary supplies that we weren't going to stay in that for long. And I did everything I could to pull myself out of it, which eventually came to be my going to community college. So I'm really big on community colleges. When I wrote
Mhm.
my book, A Day at the Fair, spelled Fare, it gave me the greatest pleasure after 5 years of penning that manuscript to find the professor who at community college had made a difference in my life that he was not aware of. And I sent him a copy of the book, and he was just stymied. He said, I had no idea you were on public assistance. You didn't seem to expect anybody to treat you any differently than the rest of the class. I had no idea you were going through the turmoil and all the things you have gone through. And I just wanted him, Ron is his name. I said, Ron, did you know that you are my life's story hero? And so after that, going to college, one day Ron calls me in and says, Pamela, be sure and come and see me after class. And I'm like, oh boy, that last paper I turned in must have been pretty bad because I was going through the heartbreak of leaving my children's dad. I was adjusting from living in a pristine, wonderful, dreamlike neighborhood to a tenement apartment on a dead end street next to the railroad tracks.
Mhm.
It was awful, and my oldest son, was beginning to demonstrate behavioral problems. So I'm like,
Mm.
that paper must have been pretty bad. I know I've been dealing with so many issues. Well, I went to see him after class, and it was about my paper that he wanted to see me. He said to me, Pamela, this is pretty good. He said, you got
Mhm.
a few weak points here and there, but to be frank with you, you can turn words into dollars. Could you
Mm.
imagine living at that level of existence and having someone tell you that your ability to think of something and to communicate it by choosing a perfect word, sentence structure, and what have you was valuable? I'm like, oh my goodness. And lo and
Oh.
behold, I followed every direction he gave me through that class. I majored in broadcast production and television journalism. And I followed
Mhm.
every instruction he ever gave me. And eventually, an unpaid internship led to my writing the very first thing I've ever had published in what was then, in 1986, a brand new newspaper called USA Today.
Oh, right.
Wow.
Fabulous.
And I would go on and continue as in journalism and communications. I do radio. I've done, I'm still in communications when it all comes down to it. But
Mhm.
again, I would never have had that realization. So one of the things, Cathy and Mary, that I often tell people is if we believe that the only things that can happen to us in our life are the things that we can conceive of. That is, oh, well, I'm going to do this and that'll happen. Or if I do that, this will happen. If those are the only things that we believe can occur within our life, we are dreadfully limiting ourselves. We got everything so squeezed down because our experiences are based either on the past, which is already gone, or we're involving ourselves and focusing on the anxiety of the future. Now, our job, should we choose to accept it, is
Mhm.
to do whatever it takes to have discipline, to seek out resources, but most importantly, expose yourself to unlimited possibilities. Now, when you do that, the universe opens up. So, which
Mhm.
one would you rather have? The
Yeah.
possibility of it coming to fruition based on your little thinking possibilities, you little human being, you? Or would you rather have it come and fall together synchronistically? And
Ah.
bada bing. That's what happened to me. And I'm a firm
Mhm.
believer
Oh.
of it.
Yeah. Well, that a lot of that sounds like you had, besides your professor, a lot of positive input. Were you reading a lot? Did you find a favorite quote somewhere that
I
you
eat
lived
books.
by?
Yes, back in those days, I was probably still feeding off of Khalil Gibran. I had a teacher in high school who just totally opened my mind by passing me paperback books. You remember those where they were just everywhere on racks in stores. And I started off reading J. Krishnamurti, Ram Dass. I mean, you name it. And I'm like, oh, so it is my wish. It is true. There is more to this knock on the wood stuff than just what we think we see.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it was on
Did you?
that that I came to realize that I am not the material things that I lost or even
Mhm.
the love that I cherished so much.
Tell us about the three most influential people you would say in your life and how they
Ooh.
impacted you.
Well, the first one is going to be Ron Morriso, who I asked permission. May I please use your name in the book as it is? And he gave me permission to do that. And I've already told you the big difference he made in my life. A more recent person would be a gentleman that I used to work under. He was my supervisor. And I went to this particular job as a Kelly temp. And I fulfilled what it was. I was doing graphic design. I had ran a graphic design business at home for 5 years and decided, nah, I'm tired of this. I want to get out a little bit. So I went into this place to do graphic design and do training manuals for them. Well, he noticed that I exceeded at that and thought, wow, not only can she do that, I think she could do this. So he says, I
Mhm.
want her. And within 4 months, he hired me full time and challenged me with another level of work. And I superseded that. And then finally, he pulls me over one day and says to me, Pamela, I'm going to excuse you from all your other duties because I want you in that last session of that nuclear engineering class. And I did it.
Wow.
Mm.
And
Wow.
so, but what left its effect upon me is the fact that when he tired of some of the things he was unhappy about in that position, he took a 45% pay cut to go and do what he really loved to do, which was teaching. And I
Mm.
always admired that about him. He went to one of the well-known colleges in Virginia. I was in Virginia at that time, Old Dominion University, became an adjunct professor and then went to Penn State and began teaching something at their School of Technology. And today he's a dean of communications for, guess what? A community college. So
Mhm.
I'm happy that he's
Mm.
happy. And I just like to use that as an example again of showing people what happens if you're willing to step out and take that chance. Opportunity will not come knocking on your door. Salesmen don't even do that anymore.
That's
How
so
And
true.
beautiful.
thirdly, it's going to be my
Uh-huh.
good old dad because
Ah.
I didn't realize, I always just thought my dad was like, he's just the totally coolest dad there is. He was always
Oh.
doing interesting things. And I would
Mhm.
follow him. I mean, my dad would be in the bathroom whipping up the shaving cream in a mug. You know, you did that back in those days. And I'd be sitting there on the edge of that bathtub just watching him in awe. If he was under the hood of the car, I wanted to know, what are these spark plugs, this gauges, this distributor cap, and all of that. And it wasn't until I bought my first home and I realized that I'm spackling a hole in the wall. And I never did that before in my life, but what I had done was watch my father do it. My father owned property. And again, I followed him everywhere he went. But the most remarkable thing that I thank my dad for today is that he is the one who stirred my interest in reading. He would get the Sunday paper and sit in that orange Naugahyde reclining chair, and I would
Oh,
be somewhere near his feet on the floor. And I noticed one day that a section of it was in color. And I started looking through it and I spread that paper down. And again, I'm right at my daddy's feet, just as happy as I could be. That was my person. And one day I was crying because I'm looking at this colorful cartoon of this big bear talking to the little bear, and I wanted to know what they were saying, and I couldn't read the gibberish in the speech bubbles. So my father began reading that to me and helping me to sound out the words and decipher the language. And it's because of that that I became this voracious reader. By the time I was 7 or 8 years old, I was constantly in the library checking out whatever the maximum amount of books were. And you see,
mm.
Mary and Kathy, it is that love of books that got cultivated that taught me how to write. Because what am I doing? I'm reading so much. I'm learning about dialogue and sentence structure and what have you just by reading. Not to mention that I came to realize that anything in the world I wanted to know, I could find out by reading a book.
That is certainly so true. Can you give some advice for those who are dealing with adversity?
Yes, I'm going to stress a few things, kind of that I've mentioned some of them. The first one is to prioritize. You know, we live in a instant gratification kind of universe. You got commercials telling you you're not this if you're not that. Okay, you're choosy mom, choose Jif. I'm like, well, I like Skippy, so does that mean I'm not a choosy mom? So you prioritize, don't fall into the instant gratification thing. Make the best decision for the long term, not for today. How about a couple months down the road? How about a couple years down the road? How about when Junior turns 18? So prioritize. You know your resources are often very limited when you're in an adverse situation. So if it was ever important that you do so, that you make the right decisions, what resources you have, and you do that by prioritizing. So prioritize. First things first. The second one I would say is to expose yourself to unlimited possibilities. I already talked about that at length. The second one is to be resourceful. There are resources out there, and you have to take the initiative to search them out. Before I decided to go to community college, I'm going to be honest. Another confession. I was scared to death about going back to school. I had started, I only got to go to 2 classes while I was in Savannah with my children's dad. And of course, that's easy. Everything is taken care and well appointed at home. You know, I got a neighbor, a loving neighbor who's tending to the baby for me while I'm in school. But now I'm in a strange city. I got next to nothing. I got these 2 children. One of them is exhibiting a behavioral problem. And I'm talking about going to school. Well, what happened was I had visited Jacksonville, which is where I went. I went from Savannah to Jacksonville. I began attending a church, and there was a woman there that had known of my and the children's situation because we made that drastic move from top of the line to bottom of a shoe mid December. And someone had sent a person from the utility company, when I went with a check from Catholic Charities to help me turn my utilities on in that tenement, she had told several people who had food banks and whatever about my situation. Because to be honest with you, by the time I got to her window, I had had the same clothing on for 6 or 7 days, and everybody was staring at me. So by the time I got to her window, I just bawled and just bust out my whole story and my kids and leaving my kid's dad. And one thing led to another. So I find out about this church, and this church sends boxes of toys and stuff to their address. And I decided to go to the church. And there was a woman there who took interest in me and the boys. Every Sunday after service, she made it her business to sashay right over to me out in the lobby and come and check on me and the boys. So she asked me, I told her, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I have to do something. My children and I can't keep living in a drug-ridden, crime-infested, dilapidated apartment. And she started talking to me about going back to school. And I told her, well, that's funny you should mention that, because I actually had started 2 classes and completed them before this whole thing happened. But I didn't know I didn't have those resources. See, here's why I'm bringing this up, resources. I didn't have childcare anymore. I didn't have even his contribution. And he was a wonderful contributor besides being a great provider. That man could cook like you wouldn't believe, and I didn't have any problems letting him. And so she would come to me and keep at me about, well, Pamela, I don't think you ought to go get a job first. I think you ought to go to school. And I'm like, well, how am I going to be able to afford books and tuition and everything that I came up, because I let fear get at me? She had an answer for it. I said, well, I don't have money for tuition. She said, there's financial aid for that. I said, what about transportation? They'll help you with that. She says, they got Pell Grants and BELG and SELG. And I said, well, what about my baby? He was just pushing 2 then. And she says, there's a subsidized childcare program. They called it daycare back then. I'm dating.
Yeah.
And it enabled me to go to school. She said, as long as you show a receipt each semester that shows you're a full-time student, your child can go there for free. So her name is Sylvia, and Sylvia had an answer to every fear that I had about why, having gone from being comfortable to just barely eking out a living, I was going to think about going back to school at age 29. And so she made a difference. And she told me she had a friend who was a communications professor there named Ron, and that ended up being Ron Morrison.
And
Because
we have to ask then, what prompted your decision to begin coaching women through unplanned major life changes?
because I've been there and done that.
Where did you? Yeah, but you made a big jump.
Yes. And now I've learned at this age, I've brought all along this experience. And I know how deep it feels, and how when it seems every facet of your life has collapsed. And so I start with getting them to realize the essential value of themselves, because I tell them that they are an odds beater, and get them to understand that just like when all of my luxury fell away, the one thing that I had to count on that had the most value was the essence of myself, my knowledge of myself, my belief in myself. Because things can come and go, but you always have yourself. And you owe it to yourself to give yourself the best shot to, again, prioritize, be resourceful, expose yourself to unlimited possibilities. And I always tell women with children, it's also important to sculpt your children's views of the world, because you don't want them to live up in a limited bubble. I told my children all the time that it is important for you to have the people skills to be able to engage with people from the penthouse to the ghetto and all points in between. And that's the way they are. They got that from me.
Mhm.
And
I
see,
bet.
I can certainly say my experience has taught me to do that. Because remember, I was the person who was shunning people on public assistance until fate knocked on my door.
That's so impressive. And do you have like a quote that you told them, your
Oh, I have
kids?
bunches. Because I write quotes.
Oh,
My number one Pamela M. Covington quote is, "The shape of your life depends upon whether you choose to be the sculptor or the clay."
haha.
Then I also like to remind them of some scientific realities, that they beat the odds by being born, by being manifested on this earth. That in order for each of us to be here, we all know that our DNA is unique. Well, let's look at it from a mathematical perspective of what it took for you to get here. 250,000 million. That's a lot. Wouldn't you like to win that much money? 250,000 million sperm cells made up with one of 10,000 female eggs to make the combination that is you. And that is why we all have a unique DNA that assures that if that test is ran and somebody's a match, it's 99.99999. So
That's
you
great.
made it through when all the other 249,999 sperm cells didn't. You're the one who made it out of 250 million. So don't tell me you're not a born odds beater, because you were born an odds beater. So why would you stop now?
I
Mhm.
bet that made a huge impact. And tell me about your book, A Day at the Fair, One Woman's Welfare Passage. What's it about? And talk a little bit about, was it easy to write? Was it hard to write?
It took me 5 years to write.
Ooh.
But I came across something one day when I was researching, and I found this nice infographic, and it showed all the amount of different times that it took to write things. Well, I didn't feel so bad, because guess what? Game of Thrones took 5 years to write. And they have Hemingway. They tell you how long it took all this to write. In those 5 years, boy, did I live a whole lot of life in between that manuscript.
Mhm.
The thing that is unique about my book, I mean, okay, you've got all your other books. You've got J.D. Vance, you've got $2 a Day, you've got Hand to Mouth, all of those other books. But the thing that makes mine unique in particular is that I wrote mine based on my welfare records, my actual welfare records. Now, here's where synchronicity kicks in and resources, and this is proof positive. When I was in community college, one of the first things that Ron taught us was about something called the FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. And I had been treated so nastily by multiple caseworkers asking me questions that had nothing to do with my eligibility, by the way, that when I found out that I had a right to certain federal records of myself, and all I had to do was write them a letter and request it, or kind of demand it in X amount of days. I'm like, I'll get them back. I'm going to make them give me copies of my welfare records. So we're talking 1986 now. I wrote that book in 2016, and the 5 years before 2016, based off
Mhm.
a timeline I created by gathering all of those records together and lining them all up. And there are actual, not pictorial excerpts, but word by word excerpts in my book from those welfare records. So that really helped me a lot.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And what is it like to share such a deeply personal part of your life like that?
You know, I went through a lot with the book because I had to make those decisions. And my story, I had a couple of different reactions to my self-questioning. If you're going to write the book, doggone it, then write the doggone book. If it's not going to have the impact, it's the purpose of it. You're trying to authentically depict something that no one else has done in a manner in which you have, then doggone it, write the book. So I would ask myself questions. The toughest thing that I had, the toughest challenge of writing the book was not my decisions about myself, but about some of the characters in the book, because it's a true story. And so the question for that was, is this thing that I'm wishing to include in this book pertinent in the depiction of the story? If I subtracted it, would that take away from the authenticity of the book? And if it would, then I would include it. And to protect people's privacy, I have a disclaimer in the front of the book that I've changed some things. Even in the information age, you would want somebody to do the same thing for you. I would change things about the character that didn't matter, her physical characteristics. Or she liked to collect little crystal doodads. Not really. She really liked to collect artificial roses. So I would just change the things in the story that still gave the portrayal that I needed there to enable the reader to see and envision and everything, but not to the point that it would put the spotlight on them. And that was my toughest thing through the whole 5 years. I had a writer support group. And during those 5 years, people were churning out books. And I'm still talking about this doggone A Day at the Fair. But I've had the most impact so far. Are you familiar with Nikki Giovanni, an activist, a poet, and okay. Well,
I
if
am
you
not.
decide
Are
to look
you,
her up at
Mary?
some time, she read my book in what had to be 3 days. I gave her a copy of it, and on day 4, I had a letter in the mail from her, and I just couldn't believe the accolades she gave me for A Day at the Fair.
Oh,
That must have made you feel
great.
like you
did.
are making a difference.
It did. So I wrote the book for certain reasons, and I made sure that when I felt I was getting astray, I would go back to that. I wanted legislators who held the same hoity-toity ideas that I had about people on public assistance to see the realities, because a lot of the other books that are focused on poverty are being written by scholarly types who are basing their information on their studies of people in poverty. But to write a book in lived experience, some of the main things that I hear over and over again is, "Oh my God, that was so real. I could feel it." Or one commenter said, "I realized at some point that I was holding my breath," you know. And so I take great pride in being able to do that, to get people to feel it. And she's like, "I was rooting for you when so-and-so said blah, blah, blah," or "I wanted to punch so-and-so out when he said that to you,"
That's
And
great.
so now one of the things I do is I take material from the book and I take it to the stage, as I did for The Moth during one of their community showcases. Now, they rarely send for people because they have so much talent in New York, but I was honored that they sent for me to actually come and perform.
Well, you talk in your book about fear and that fear can be a prison. Would you
Ooh,
mind
yes.
sharing the fears you faced beyond what you talked about and how you managed to move beyond them?
Yes, or make it work for me, because I'll give you an example. One morning, and I write this in the book, it's in the book. One morning I wake up, my oldest son is downstairs at the bottom of the hollow cement steps and yelling, "Mom, Mom, somebody came in the house while we were asleep last night." So see, my children and I are upstairs in the bedrooms sleeping. We're in this tenement where all we have for a window is one in the front, one in the back, because the other units are side by side. And we're by these railroad tracks. So what someone did, they know that over time you have to get used to sleeping through the trains. And so they knew that once we were upstairs at night, when a train came, they could come and pop one of the little windows and reach in and undo the latch. And so you talk about fear. I was already heartbroken, dealing with a child with behavioral problems, just always trying to manage for basic necessities, adjusting economically and culturally. And now, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, somebody came in the house one night while we were upstairs in the apartment sleeping in our bedrooms. So you know what? That fear became another major driver. Like, dang it. I said, we're not going to stay here and live like this any longer. And somebody just gave me another reason. And remember, I didn't have appliances. The only thing I had to cook in at that time, I'll never forget, it was like 4th of July, like, yeah, some Independence Day, was they took the only 2 appliances, like countertop appliances I had to cook with. They took my Sunbeam fry pan, a little square with round corners, and you plug the plug in and turn the knob. And they took my toaster oven, and they went in my refrigerator and took what food I had in there. So
no.
from that point on, and they took the only thing that the children and I had to do, which was a 19-inch color TV.
Oh my gosh.
So we have no food, our appliances are gone, and they took the TV, and my children and I are sitting there looking at cement walls.
What did you
So
do?
that fear, I took it, and mind you, I never slept upstairs anymore. I slept downstairs on my sofa from that point on with a baseball bat. But fear will mess you up. You know, I almost let fear stop me from getting that article in USA Today, because fear was telling me, here I am, just going by thinking that everything outside there is bigger than me. Well, for one thing, in 1986, you could count the number of Black journalists pretty much on one hand. And here I am, this welfare person, going to St. Mary's, Georgia, which I want to say is maybe 45 minutes away, and covering a story on President Reagan's signing off on the Trident submarine program and what effect it's going to have on the local townspeople. So I was scared because, first of all, I don't have any press credentials. I'm driving an old hoopty, old Monte Carlo, and I'm going to St. Mary's, Georgia. Well, I got there, and there was this nice, rotund, Santa Claus-like gentleman who helped me. I always am, when I'm instinctive when you're eking out a living. Remember, everything's about resources. So I'm sitting in the car for a moment before I start the work. And I'm like, I'll go into the real estate office. If anybody knows what impact a submarine program or any kind of jobs or money coming into an area is going to affect something, the realtor does. That's where I met the Santa Claus type guy. And he was so nice to me. He made me feel guilty for thinking I'd be treated any other kind of way. He offered me an ice cold Coca-Cola. He told me that when I was done doing my interviewing, because I went up and down the street and went to the convenience store, talked to other people, that I was welcome to come back to his office and use his phone to dictate, because that's what we did back in them days. And I did it. And then I almost let fear mess me up, because when it first came to me, the internship I was doing at that time that led to it was at a city lifestyle magazine called Jacksonville Today. And back then, computers were just getting started. Word processors were just coming out. And Apples might have been around, but they didn't have hard drives yet. That's how archaic things still were. And the editor called me over and told me that was someone on the phone from a newspaper, and they're looking for a stringer reporter to go and cover a story on submarines in St. Mary's, Georgia. I'm like, submarines? I don't know about submarines, and I don't have any press credentials and all of that. And I thought about, you know what I thought about, ladies? I thought about what Ron would say. I said, boy, if Ron knew that I was thinking about turning that down, he'd have me. He'd call me in his office for something not so nice. So I went in the bathroom and had a conversation with myself and said, girl, you got the car. You kind of know what to do. You don't want to disappoint Ron, and you don't want to disappoint yourself. Get your butt up that road.
And share some other insights that you can share with our listeners regarding dealing with fear.
Well, there's a couple of different acronyms. You can face everything and rise, or fear everything and run. And some people say fear is false evidence appearing real. And because we do not know everything, if we put a label of fear on it, we're blocking it. We're blocking any good that could come our way. And I can think of many times that I have applied that. And you owe it to yourself to not be fearful. And again, one of the ways that you can do that is to tapping into the essence of yourself. Remember that unique being that I explained to you. You are your own best resources. Remember I said prioritize and resources. Well, you are your own best resource. And if you will just calm the heck down, you could come to terms. You can be more efficient. But if you're just going to be, oh my God, the sky is falling and I don't have this. Look, see what I almost did? I almost judged that opportunity based on I'm living in poverty and I don't have any credentials and I'm Black and there aren't a lot of Black journalists. Yeah, they're really going to be, yeah, lady, right. So you see, your imagination can work for you or work against you. So instead of letting it work against you by feeding that fear, let it work for you by imagining the greatest of possibilities. Or at the very least, by opening yourself up to it and then allowing the possibilities to happen. But I tell you that fear is a lock, and imagination and realization of your essential self, that self that you have when all of your comforts are taken away, are key to you making your way out. If you don't know what a problem, if you don't identify a problem, how can you solve it? So if you let fear be a problem and you don't identify fear, then how can you rise yourself above it? You can't.
Oh, that is such great advice for our audience. Is there anything else you'd like our audience to remember? What would that golden nugget be?
It's someone else's quote that I've tried to attribute but can't find in this wonderful World Wide Webby thingy. And it is, remember this, and it's true, I can attest to it, that on the day of victory, no fear is felt. No pain is felt. On the day of victory, no pain is felt. It's pain. No pain is felt. On that day that I got, because let me tell you, let me wrap this up about the USA Today thing. Can you imagine how I felt the next day that I went to Ron's class? I walked not past that newspaper machine that I had walked past every single day, but that time took a couple of quarters that I had from my food stamp change, because you got coins back in those days, and I put them in that machine and opened that door. I almost tore that paper up looking for my name.
And was it there?
Yes, I have a copy of it too. Not the paper, but a photocopy of it. But you know what?
The irony of it is,
the irony of it was when I saw my name, I'm like, oh my God, what if my caseworkers see that? I said, girl, they're not going to think that that's you, because they can say, she can't, that's not her. She's just another welfare mom. Right?
Wow.
We don't never know. But our job, again, should we decide to take it, is to discipline yourself, to be resourceful and open yourself up to limited possibilities, because you will not supersede the adversity if you do not.
Perfect.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Our guest today on Late Boomers has been Pamela M. Covington, author, speaker, and women's transition coach. You can learn more about her on PamelaMCovington.com. And she's on all social media platforms. And you have to pick up her book, which is called, Pamela, tell everybody what the name of your book is.
A Day at the Fair, which is a play on words, FARE, One Woman's Passage, because that's exactly what it was. I got in there, got what I needed, and got the heck out.
Great. And we want to thank our listeners for subscribing to our podcast and checking us out on YouTube. And please recommend us to your friends. We appreciate you and we want to hear about your experiences with late boomers and what gets you inspired. We're on Instagram at I am Cathy Worthington and at I am Merry Elkins and at Late Boomers. Thank you for listening and thanks again, Pamela.
My honor. Thank you both, ladies. I appreciate you, Cathy and Merry.
Thank you for joining us on Late Boomers, the podcast that is your guide to creating a third act with style, power, and impact. Please visit our website and get in touch with us at lateboomers.biz. If you would like to listen to or download other episodes of Late Boomers, go to ewnpodcastnetwork.com.
This podcast is also available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and most other major podcast sites. We hope you make use of the wisdom you've gained here and that you enjoy a successful third act with your own style, power, and impact.